Welcome to the Dr. Chris Radio Horror Show tonight here at WCUW. Tonight we have a very distinguished guest with us. We have the man responsible for why we are so educated about comic books today in schools and universities, probably more universities than regular high schools. But I haven't been in high school since 1998, so I don't know what they're currently teaching. But I know my son's not telling me they're teaching him about comic books. But I hope to one day see a class about comic books in high school. But Michael was responsible for the first accredited college class about teaching and educating people about comics, and then went on to become a lawyer as well as produce some movies about a guy who's got, issues with his parents dying. But I digress. Thank you for coming on the show with us, Michael. I really do appreciate it. I know we've been trying to get this connected for a while.
Thanks, Chris. I really am happy to be here. Love talking to fellow geeks at any moment in time.
You've been, I'm assuming you've been pretty busy this year, up till like the first half of the year, doing whatever you do in Hollywood. But then the beginning of the second half of the year, a little writer's strike probably put you on a different path, right?
Well, we have just opened an exhibition that I've curated with my son, David, at the Comic-Con Museum in San Diego. We opened it up the day before San Diego Comic-Con. It is Excelsior, the Life and Legacy of Stan Lee. And it is going to be at the Comic-Con Museum until March, but that consumed me. I mean, literally 18 hours a day, 7 days a week to get that mounted. And with the help of private collectors whom I knew, auction houses like Heritage and Metropolis Comics, we were able to assemble original art and comic books and memorabilia that's absolutely incredible. It's the kind of thing that if I was a comic book fan growing up in New Jersey, I would literally get on an airplane and fly to San Diego to see this thing. We have original Steve Ditko Spider-Man art pages. We have original early Jack Kirby Fantastic Four pages. John Buscema's cover to Submariner #1. I mean, the list just goes on and on. We have the earliest known existing piece of original art from Timely Comics of Stan Lee's work from early 1942. And
Wow.
then from my collection, I brought in every first issue of every Marvel comic. And I literally transported them from New Jersey to San Diego in a oversized gym bag that I was clutching the entire flight until I could get it safely into the hands of the museum. So there's tons to see, tons to do. And I have to say that it is a salute to Stan and all the co-creators of the Marvel Universe. And when you walk in there, you are going to see a big thing devoted to Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Don Heck, Larry Lieber, John Buscema, Johnny Romita. The list goes on and on and on, with everybody having co-created this Marvel Age of Comics as a gift to all of us.
That's fantastic. I know there's a Jack Kirby museum in New York as well. I know that there's a couple different comic book, just comic book art museums as well. But that's great that Stan Lee has now his own museum. What's the address of it?
It's in Balboa Park in
Okay.
San Diego, and it's massive. I mean, it's next to the Air and Space Museum, and
Oh, cool.
it is roughly the same size. It is really, really huge, and it's something we wanted to do in what would have been Stan's 100th birthday year.
So I don't know how much you follow silly news, but I'm sure you heard that there was a Megabucks lottery recently, and somebody won it in Florida. I think it was up to $1.55 billion.
Yeah.
And so the lump sum payout from that is over 785 million if you take the lump sum. And my boss, and we're all like, we're talking about in the office. Well, did you buy a ticket? Yeah, I didn't buy a ticket. Did you buy a ticket? No, I didn't buy a ticket. I'm glad I didn't buy a ticket. Someone in Florida won it. But I said to myself, if I won that, besides paying off my debt, and besides like contacting a friend I know is struggling and be like, hey, what do you need? Here's $1 million. Just make sure you're spending out what you need to. I'd march into the first comic book store in a local comic shop that I am familiar with, that I know is dear and dear to my heart, and say, hey, I'm going to take that Amazing 15 and that Amazing Spider-Man #1 and that Batman #1 right there you've had on the wall right there. Just here's some cash, just to have those as my first purchase of being a millionaire.
Well, Chris, I was not a billionaire growing up. I was a blue-collar kid from New Jersey. My dad was a stonemason. My mom was a bookkeeper. And I have mostly all of those comic books, and I bought them all for either 10 cents or 12 cents. And in many cases, we had a flea market nearby that sold every Friday night. They came in with boxes and boxes of these old comic books and dumped them onto a broken down card table. But because they were so old, they only charged 5 cents a piece
Right.
for it. And that's how I amassed this amazing collection. By the time I graduated high school, I had over 30,000 comic books dating back to 1936. So it didn't take $1 billion to do it.
That's good. That's good. But if you ever had a time machine, would you ever go back in time and buy like 10 copies of something that was 10 cents back in the day that you know is worth like $100,000, $1 million now?
I would buy out the print runs.
I said the same thing. Someone's like, "What did you do with the time machine?" I'm like, "Well, I'd love to go back in time to like when Star Wars came out, just to be there in the audience, or when The Empire Strikes Back or something like that." But I would go back in time and buy like 10 copies of like the first appearance of Spider-Man or Batman or Superman or whatever, and then come back to the present with their mint condition. And I would honestly give them away. I would keep a few for myself. I would sell a couple because I'm not stupid, but I'd also give away a couple to people that I know are massive collectors as just like a gift, and just be like, do what you will with these. I'm not going to say if you need to sell them or keep them, but yeah, that's something I always say I would do. I would go back and buy original prints of comic books. And someone's like, "Well, what if you upset the balance of the space-time continuum?" I'm like, Mom and Dad threw those comic books out more than likely to someone, and they became trash in a fire bin in the neighborhood fires of the 1950s. So trust me, I'm not upsetting the space-time continuum too much.
I'll tell you one thing. This is the comic book twist to your story. You spend all the money that you can to invent this time machine, and you go back with this $1 billion, and you go to buy all these things, and then they look at your money dated from 2020, 2023, and they go, "This is fake money," and nobody will take your money.
No. See, I've got that. I thought about what Doc Brown did in Back to the Future Part 2, where he's got that briefcase with the money, mapped out for the different years. Because, like a dime, I'd have to really, figure out how much, what a dollar bill looked like back then to compare it to today. And because if you go to your bank, they will give you like older bills sometimes. But I don't know if they have any from the 1930s when Superman was first appeared. But I'm sure I could find something at like let's say a yard sale in the 50s or whatever. I'd still be able to pass it off to somebody. So.
Good luck in tracking down Mercury dimes and Buffalo head nickels.
If I'm doing that, then I should stay in the business of just tracking ancient artifacts in like the hills of California and the gold mines or something.
Yeah, that would be kind of funny. You come back, you couldn't buy all these comic books, but all of the coins you got are now worth a fortune.
Gotcha. I got a question for you. Since you were involved in the Stanley Museum, what do you and give me your honest opinion. What do you think of the Disney Plus Stanley documentary that came out? Because there's been some mixed reactions about it.
I did not like it at all.
Okay. That's fine.
I did not like it at all. I thought it was a self-serving piece, generally speaking. If they had called it Stanley in his own words, that would have gone down a little smoother for me. And the thing I resented most was, look, Stan and Jack and Stan and Joe Simon and Simon and Kirby, they had an 80-year relationship. And as with any friendships and any working relationships, they're complicated and they shift. And one of the things that I put up in the Stanley exhibition in San Diego, I have a picture of Stan and Jack laughing and hugging each other as two younger men. And then I have a picture of the two of them as old men hugging each other and laughing. You cannot define an 80-year relationship in the term of a 3-minute moment in time. Egos changed on all sides. Everything shifted. The nomenclature shifted. You can't define it just like that. It's very complex and complicated. That's why in our exhibition, we treat and address everybody as co-creators at Marvel. And that's Jack, that's Steve, and that's Don Heck, and everybody else that was part of that process. That was not the work of one individual. And I think everybody needs to acknowledge that. Stan did later in life. He certainly did. So I had real issues with the documentary.
If you had to pick one, uh, if you had to pick one creator that you never had a chance to meet or interact with, who would it be?
Wow.
And by the way, you don't just have to stick to comics. It could be somebody in your lifetime. Let's just keep it to your lifetime. Otherwise, we're gonna go too off. We're not gonna go back to like the post 20th century. But someone in your lifetime that has come and gone. Who is somebody that you've missed an opportunity meeting or working with?
I would have loved to have met Major Malcolm Wheeler Nichols. He was the person who created what became DC Comics. And he launched New Fun, which became More Fun Comics, then New Comics, which became Adventure Comics, Detective Comics. And approximately a month before the debut of Action Comics, which he had developed with Vince Sullivan and others, the company wound up, he was forced into an involuntary bankruptcy and the company was taken over and he was ousted. And I think there's so much of the importance of early comic book history regarding DC, how the industry operated in its early days, how Superman actually really came to be, and what the process was through what people. I think it's a fascinating, fascinating topic, and I would have loved to have had time with him to explore that. Yeah, and you got to remember that comics are an art form. Comics are also a business. It's for the same reason I would have loved to have talked to Martin Goodman,
Hmm.
who's the publisher of Timely, ultimately Atlas, and then Marvel.
Stanley's uncle, right?
He was Stan's cousin through marriage.
Cousin through marriage. Okay.
Cousin through marriage. So there are a lot of people on the business side I would have loved to have talked to. On the creative side, I'm very, very fortunate. I met Bill Finger twice. I had a weekly written correspondence starting in seventh grade with C.C. Beck. Otto Binder was my first mentor. Otto had been
Uh,
the co-creator of Mary Marvel and the Marvel family.
yeah, let me tell you, when I read that chapter of your book, I cried. I was like, and then you talk about what happened afterwards. I was like,
It was one of the ultimate tragedies.
I don't think I've cried reading a biography since Becoming Superman by J. Michael Straczynski. Which, if you've read that, that is a horror story unto itself. The first several chapters of that book, and now he's writing Captain America, it's starting I think next month. So, but that is a whoo. Uh,
I mean,
and Kane Hodder, by the way, if you ever read Kane Hodder's biography, he was the guy who played Jason in 4 of the Friday the 13th movies. He goes into a great detail about his the burns on his body and scars and stuff like that. So those 3 books, I was like in tears.
I understand that completely. I would have loved to have talked to Max Gaines, Bill Gaines' dad, who was there at the beginning of the comic book industry and the early days of DC and how Superman came to be. So many people like that we've really not been able to document. Now a lot of the old correspondence is beginning to surface here and there, and we're all starting to put the pieces together. But it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've met, and because you're a executive producer on the Suicide Squad movies, right?
I am not.
You're not. Okay, okay. Those are ones you're not involved with. Okay, I thought maybe because of they have some extension to Bat Family stuff that you would have been. Um,
That's a very interesting point. We'll
yeah.
talk about that in my third volume of my memoir.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. I can't wait. But I'm assuming you've met John Ostrander.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So John Ostrander's wife, Kim, we're doing an episode about her on my TV show, and just like the fascinating things you find out about somebody that you only hear about in passing. Like I had no idea about anything about his wife. Just like before we were talking, I knew the name Dave Stevens. I know he created the Rocketeer, but I knew squat about who he was as a person until I watched that documentary, and I was just like, wow. This guy was more like Tim Vigil sometimes than than a lot of people give him credit for. Tim Vigil, for anyone not familiar with, created Faust and draws a lot of like adult pornographic horror imagery and loves drawing women, and Dave Stevens did as well. But Kim, when I was interviewing John about her, was giving me this earful and like the politics she was behind and like the things that she would be against today and stuff like that. And I'm just like feverishly writing down notes while I'm listening to it and recording it just to make sure I'm emphasizing stuff when we edit the episode together. And just hearing sometimes people's like backstory, as you just went into a little bit, is just unbelievable. About gangs and stuff like that, and the documentation of these people that, as I said before, nobody knows who some of these people are. Paul Ryan is a local hero, but still, I just don't think he's as as revealed in the pantheons of the history of the Fantastic Four as much as he should be. Mark Grunwald only is just becoming more and more well known because of the fact they're using John Walker and stuff in the Marvel shows. But with Gaines, I mean, I'm sure there's just so much wealth of history behind everything to do with how his legacy continues living on today through Mad Magazine, still being published.
No question about it. And if there's one artist I wish I could have met, he died tragically, was killed in a subway accident, was Joe Maneely. Now, very, very few people know who Joe Maneely was.
Nope, I don't.
Joe was Stan's #1 artist in the Atlas era.
Okay.
Maneely, whether it was Black Knight, so many stories were done by Joe Maneely. I think Tomorrow's has a book of his work, and his work was incredible. I have a piece in the Stanley exhibition. I have a page of his original artwork from Two Gun Kid. Joe would have been, had he not died tragically right before the Marvel Age of Comics started, he probably would have been Stan's #1 guy. And it makes me think, what if the Fantastic Four or some of the early ones were by Maneely as opposed to Kirby or opposed to Ditko? And I think there is a tremendous comic book story there, a what if story. So Joe Maneely is if you don't know who he is, everybody, you should really look him up and take a look at his work.
I can't believe he died when he was 32 years old. Jesus.
Yeah, he deserves our attention, and he deserves to be remembered.
That's unbelievable. There was when I was putting together like the trailer of these people who had passed away, just to kind of like show it off to certain people that I was trying to get involved. I was really digging, into like the background culture of things. And there was a book that came out, I think a year ago. Actually, I have it on my phone. Let me see if I can pull up the proper title. I don't know if you've heard of this book, Comic Book Women, Characters, Creators, and Culture in the Golden Age, and a deep dive into all the women that worked in the background in comic books that just don't get the recognition, or were like, just, they were basically doing backup duty, and then they were taking over full time as the artists and writers when the guys went off to the war.
I've spent time with Ramona Fradon, who worked primarily at DC. I met Lily Renee, who is renowned in her work in the golden age of comics. Marie Severin, who was at EC Comics before moving on to Marvel. And there are so many stories. I mean, Ramona used to tell the story of how, I don't know if petrified is the right word. She just dreaded walking into the bullpen that was 1940s and 50s, male dominated, and the harassment that she had to endure. And unfortunately, it's a common story from the handful of women that were involved really deeply in the golden age, and what they had to endure. It's another story worth being told.
Let's dive into something more jovial. Comic books right now. What do you have any comic books you're working on right now coming up?
Yeah, actually, I've got a graphic novel in the works. It's a little bit too early to talk about it.
Okay.
But
do you have anything coming out in the next couple months that may be coming up in previews you can mention?
Well, I will mention that I'm now involved with my son David in what are going to be introduced as Stan Lee comics.
Okay.
It's going to be a line coming out of Legible, out of Canada, in conjunction with Cartoon Studios. And we are going to be doing some really, really great things with some properties that Stan created post-Marvel.
Cool.
With top talent representing writers and artists in the business. And it's kind of a reflection of what we did at DC last December 28th when they published on Stan Lee's 100th birthday, a celebration of Stan, Tales from Earth 6, which brought back all of the Just Imagine characters he created at DC 20 years earlier.
Yep.
I had brought Stan over to DC from Marvel and said, yeah, create Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman the way you would have created them at Marvel. And we lined up legendary talent like Joe Kubert, John Buscema, Jim Lee, Dave Gibbons, my God, Walt Simonson. The list goes on and on.
I loved those books. I got those came out right after I got out of the army, and I was so excited to see those. I was like dying to get out of the army because the damn military base didn't have a comic book store. I was just like, I got to get home and get these books.
Well, Stan never ever wanted to be considered retro, and if you go back and look what he did 22 years ago, his Batman was black, his Wonder Woman and Aquaman were Hispanic. His Flash was a teenage girl. His Robin was Latino. His Shazam was based on Indian culture. He was literally ahead of his time in terms of where the world has gone. So for his birthday, we brought it back, and DC said to me, okay, Michael, which one do you want to write? I said, I want to write Stan Lee's Batman. And I wrote it as if he was standing over my shoulder. And I said, all right, he would have wanted me to create his Batman's villain. And what would Stan have done to create a major Batman villain? What would he have wanted? And I'm picturing him standing over my shoulder. I go, I got it. A deranged, maniacal serial killer in Gotham City who's been killing women, and the tabloids, he's been strangling women, and the tabloids label him as the choker. I go, okay, Stan would have patted me on the back and go, yes, Batman versus the choker. That's what I want. And it's those kind of fun things. And he always wanted a twist to his stories. So at the end, the Stan Lee Batman has had a very, very strained relationship with Commissioner Gordon and the police. And they've been hunting him down. And finally, Gordon says to him, okay, let's make peace here. We can work together. Let's make a signal so I can call you anytime I need you. And Batman just says, the hell with that. Don't call me, I'll call you. And that, okay, to me, that's a Stan moment. That would have been a twist that he would have liked. So it's fun for me when I go back into it. It's just a joy.
I gotta say, I have to thank you for a big piece of my childhood. It has nothing to do with Batman. It's Dino Saucers. When I read your book, I was just like, oh my god, I feverishly watched that when I was a kid. When that debuted, I was blown away.
That is so great to hear, Chris. You know, I've been trying to convince Sony to let us do a live action feature film version of that.
Oh my god, that would be awesome.
I said, guys, it's freaking Jurassic Park versus G.I. Joe, for God's sake.
Yeah.
It's something I would love to see come back. There are some websites. I think there's over 24 websites devoted to dinosaurs now.
Right, and why not? I mean, with Barbie making $1 billion, I mean, it's time to do more things like that when it's done right. I mean, yeah, the last Transformer movie was moderately successful, but not as much as Barbie. But still, there's still gold in them hills of Energon and on Cybertron to tap. So why not? You know, something that's just so far out there, like Dino Saucers. I know everyone's like always Jason the Wheel Warriors or something really obscure, but you know, I would love to see. How about this as a horror for kids? If the Five Nights at Freddy movie does well, do the Inhumanoids. Remember that?
Yeah, sure.
That would be amazing. I think that would make a killing as a feature film, especially again if the Five Nights at Freddy does well, just to tap that child's horror aesthetic, which is, you know, hit or miss sometimes. You know, we had Hocus Pocus 2 last year. That was hit or miss, but you know, there have been moderate successes in the children's horror thing, as long as we're not dumbing it down enough for no reason and making it appealing to both adults and children. But yeah, you're right. Dino Saucers, God, that would be fantastic. Now,
one of the things that I've been trying to, for decades, convince DC Warner to let me do, I always wanted to do the Spectre as a horror film.
Everyone I know wants the Spectre that knows who that character is.
It's got to be as the Freddy Krueger of superheroes.
Oh,
And that's probably the number one thing I would have
And the Spectre would be CGI. You know, the Corrigan guy would be a human. I don't know who would play the human, but what if the Spectre? Because you just mentioned Nightmare on Elm Street, what if the Spectre was voiced by Robert Englund?
very interesting.
Which I admit Robert Englund is not, you know, he's a name in the horror community. Is he a name enough for a Hollywood studio to be like, okay, let's bank our $200 million on a guy only horror fans know? But I think it'd be I think that would be I think that'd be worth it. Who would you cast as Jim Corrigan, real quick?
Um, to me, it's not important. To me, what's more important is the filmmaker and the filmmaker's vision for it.
Okay,
When people bring up, yeah, every single time we do a Batman or Batman related movie, everybody's up in arms about the casting,
right.
whether it's Michael Keaton or Ben Affleck or Heath Ledger as the Joker. We catch flack from all sides for it. And I always say to my fellow
Hey,
fans,
the one casting, if you guys ever did it, you don't get flack for would be Jared Padalecki. I know he's the voice, but come on. Not
I,
Jared Padalecki, Jensen Ackles. I'm sorry, Jensen Ackles.
well, look, there are so many great actors out there, but it all comes down to the filmmaker's vision. So I say, don't look at who's been cast. Look at the filmmaker. Then try to understand the filmmaker's vision. Like if you can't understand that Zack Snyder wanted a Bruce Wayne who was in his mid-40s, done with it, bitter, frustrated, had to be dragged back into it. When you understand the filmmaker's vision, then Ben Affleck makes more sense. When
Right.
you understand that Matt Reeves wants to do a young, emerging Batman, doesn't want to do a Bruce Wayne origin story yet again, and all of a sudden, the casting of Robert Pattinson makes a lot of sense. And every scene he's in is drenched in the origin story of Batman without ever having to repeat the origin story of Batman. So
Right.
I keep saying, look at the filmmaker.
Well, Michael, Zoom's going to kill us in about a few seconds, so I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. Why don't you plug where people can find your massive new project again?
You can find the Stanley exhibition at Comic-Con Museum in Balboa Park in San Diego. It'll be up until March, and it's worth the trip. You can find me on both Instagram and Facebook, and I welcome interaction over there. So, want to get in a plug for my memoirs. It's The Boy Who Loved Batman, and volume 2 is called Batman's Batman. There's a reason for that. Both are available through Amazon, as are the Audible book versions of each one, which I was fortunate enough to be allowed to narrate and had a ball doing that. And I'm pleased to announce that my memoirs are now being turned into a Broadway play by the Niederlander Organization of New York City. It is steamrolling ahead. I am very excited about it. And they believe that a story coming out of the comic book world and the movie world can be inspirational and fun and entertaining. And these days, that's what Broadway is looking for post-pandemic and with the world in the shape that it's in. So my great hope is that through the magic of Broadway, my story will really resonate and help to inspire a lot of young people. And it's basically the story of a kid who grew up as a comic book geek, who didn't know anyone in Hollywood, had no relatives in Hollywood, didn't come from money and couldn't buy his way into Hollywood, winds up as a kid in his 20s buying the rights to Batman from DC Comics, and then setting out to make dark and serious Batman movies to show the whole world he's not just a pot-bellied pow zap wham funny guy, but in the interests of Bill Finger and Bob Kane, was a creature of the night stalking deeply disturbed villains in the shadows. And from the time I bought the rights to Batman till we were able to get our first movie made, it took 10 years. 10 years. I was turned down by every studio in Hollywood. They told me it was the worst idea they ever heard. They said, kid, you can't do serious comic book movies. You're crazy if you think you can do dark superheroes. You're out of your mind if you think you can make a movie out of an old TV series. Nobody's ever done that. And so it took 10 years to get our first Batman movie made in 1989 with Tim Burton, Michael Keaton, and Jack Nicholson. And the rest, as they say, is history. because we wound up changing the world's perception of comic books and superheroes. We changed Hollywood forever, for good or bad, and we changed the comic book industry. And that's my story. That's my journey. And I love the fact that through my memoirs, it is now being turned into a Broadway play.
One thing, just real quick, one thing I always curious when I did read that part of the book was, what if you had back in the 10 years that it took you to get Batman on the screen, the stuff that we had today. We had the media output, the social media. Do you think that would have made any difference in like it would still been like a 10-year haul? And obviously, without all of the comic book stuff that has come out, still not in existence yet. Do you think that would have made any difference in 10 years?
I don't think it would have, because if you realize that back in 1988, 87, leading into 89, there was a public outcry against us. Oh my God, you're hiring Mr. Mom, a stand-up comedian to play Batman, and it's going to be directed by the director of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. You guys are out to destroy Batman forever. And it was everywhere. We were inundated with petitions and protests and demonstrations. I thought they were going to surround the studio with pitchforks and torches. It was so bad. And it was everywhere. It was newspapers, magazines, TV, radio, and there were no computers. There was no social media back then. It was what happened. And it wasn't until the first trailer got out there to show fans and people generally, no, wait a minute, stop. This is a dark and serious version of Batman before the tide is turned. And then it became the magical summer of 1989, where you could not walk 20 steps in Times Square without running into someone in a Batman hat or a Batman t-shirt.
Right.
And the other thing that happened, Chris, was, and God knows what it's been today.
Michael, we're losing your audio real quick, by the way.
Oh, okay.
There we go. It's back. It's back.
Okay. I don't know how to describe this, and I have no idea what the impact of social media would have been. But for the first time in history, a movie was advertised and marketed. Billboards, gigantic billboards went up, posters went up without the name of the movie on it. It was just a black bat with a gold oval, and it said June 23rd. Yet somehow, mystically, everybody in America, everybody in the world knew what was coming. And I contend that the marketing campaign for our first Batman movie was possibly the greatest marketing campaign by a movie studio in history.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was 9 years old at the time. I had never seen anything like that in my life. I mean, I said this to Kevin Conroy a year ago. So this was, I'm sorry, 2 years ago. 21 Boston Comic Con. We were still plastic shields in front of us. And I said to him, when the Batman animated series came out, like, I had never seen so many people grasp on to Batman since the '89 movie. More so with this, because of the fact it was at home. You didn't have to go to the theater, or maybe, I don't know. But it was like a thing. Even my father was not a comic book fan. In fact, he was one of those people who threw out my comic books. And I think it's just based on when he grew up. But he got into Batman the animated series. He loved Michael Keaton's Batman. That was a film that he watched, or whatever. We watched, with my stepmother. We watched multiple times when he got the VHS tape for Batman after my parents got divorced, and then he got the VHS tape for Batman Returns. But Batman the animated series, and that Batman right there, that billboard that you were talking about, it united us in a way that I don't think we ever really were united as father and son again for, I think, forever. But that was, I told that to Kevin Conroy. That was like, listen, this your animated series was the thing that brought me and my father together in a way that we weren't connected very well a lot of times. But this was something he sat down and watched and was just like pointing out to me, like, the art style deco of it all, and just like when we watched the Batman movie of '89, how it all looked and, giving me like an education on film, which I never even heard he would ever have before because I've never knew him to be a film buff like myself. So that was the film that united us as father and son more so than anything else.
Well, I'll tell you, at this stage of my life and career, when the word legacy is of looming importance to me.
I'm losing your audio again. There we
At
go.
this stage of my life and career, legacy is the most important word to me. And the greatest thing is whenever I'm speaking at a college, university, Comic-Con, business conference, people come up to me and say, Michael, I got to tell you, Batman '89, I saw it with my father or my mom or my grandparents, and they're not here anymore. But it's such an important moment to me. I will always have that bond that we experienced watching that movie together. And it's something I want to emulate with my kids or my grandkids to give them that same bonding feeling. And that's truly amazing. That is truly an amazing thing.
I look forward to hopefully catching this play if it gets produced, and your third memoir that you mentioned, talking about your like when I brought up the thing about the Suicide Squad and not being executive producer of those. So I know there's more obviously story to tell, considering how much you've had going on. It's definitely been a Bible blueprint for me to go back and reference for things involving my own TV show documentary, which God only knows what will happen with it. We have the pilot done at least, so I mean the first step is there. The next step is because I believe this is educational and it's about the arts. I'm also getting involved with somebody that knows how to write grants to look for grant money to make more episodes. I don't have time to do Kickstarter and crowdfunding. I've done it before. I did it for my own graphic novel during the pandemic. A lot easier when you're working from home. But we're going to looking into to find the money with investors and grants and all these this free money the government gives away for the arts and education and stuff to hopefully show that this is something that people need to be educated about with these people who have passed away. But your books were definitely a kick in the butt I needed when I was just like, this is too hard. I don't know if I can do this, so I don't want to give up on it as quickly as I thought I was going to. So I thank you so much for coming on the show, and I thank you for your education of comic books because it's always been a huge thing in my life. I can't remember how far back it goes. I'm gonna probably say Spider-Man cartoons in the '80s, but when I first started picking up comics and reading them was around the time Batman '89 came out, and that was around the time I think I ever actually read a Batman comic book. The Untold Origins of Batman might have been the 3-issue series. But that Batman movie made me point out how big this stuff was and how it was so important for us to show that comic books were educational in some ways and artistic. I would love one day I always joke saying if I ever became a teacher I wouldn't teach them War and Peace. I would teach them The Dark Knight Returns. I would teach them Batman Year One. I would teach them the follies of writing in certain bad superhero stories. I'm not gonna name any in particular, but I would show them the good writing and the bad writing and just what the difference is. I would pull out the old trope of the Justice League of the Greek gods and the comparison between the two. And in my own way with my son, while I'm always trying to get him to read comic books and find what he's interested in, it's the same thing. I ask him what he's learning about in school, and I'm like, oh, well, there's this comic book that's also covering this, or there's this comic book that relates to it. You should try and read it as well. So, and he's grasped onto a lot of those, especially historical comic books. He's really getting into comic books that are comedic, but they're also telling the true story of history. He read one about Abe Lincoln, and it had a lot of funny cartoons in there about Abe Lincoln, but they were all facts. They were all true facts, and it was hilarious to see that this book they had put together. So, and he really read it cover to cover. So,
I have to refer back to my graphic novel, Batman, Detective Number 27. It
yes.
was all real facts of history, real people who lived, real incidents of history. And all I did was lay in Batman Bruce Wayne over the whole thing. And I'm told it was the first comic book or graphic novel that had historical footnotes in the back.
Yeah.
And that's something I love to do. I did the same thing when I wrote The Shadow for Nikki Barussi over at Dynamite.
Yeah, I saw that. I got that Batman as Batman Detective number 27.
Cool.
Yeah,
Well, Chris, what you just said basically has validated my career, if not my existence. So I owe you big time for that.
Oh well, I will definitely be when we work on the credits are kind of stale right now in my opinion on the pilot, but as we go along, especially probably when we get to maybe not with the Mark Grunwald episode, but when we get to the Denny O'Neil episode, which Mike Carlin and I are going to be sitting down to talk about working alongside him in the competition between Batman and Superman in the DC offices. Oh, you killed Superman? Well, we're gonna break our Batman. You know, I will throw you up there in the credits that this episode couldn't be possible without the educational experience of pushing. We'll word it in some way that makes sense, but your name will be put in the credits as a thank you to all the hard work of you to get us to where we are to educate people about our creators and comics and who they are and the arts and stuff like that. So
I appreciate that, Chris. You may also want to take a look at one of the special features that I did. Don't ask me which Batman movie Warner Brothers put it on the DVD. It was like a kind of like a dinner for five kind of a thing, like Favreau was doing. It was me hosting Scott Snyder, Denny O'Neil, Dan DiDio in a multiple generational talk about Batman, DC Comics, superheroes, and it was a lot of fun.
okay. I buy physical media, so I probably have those bonus features. I will look for it. I don't have HBO Max right now, so I know there's the DC history lesson on there because I'm friends with JMD Mateus and he's on it talking a lot. But I will dig through my Batman Blu-rays and DVDs to try and find that to figure out which one it is. I have most of them, so I have the ones that are really like the big ones, like Year One and Under the Red Hood, the Last Halloween, The Last Halloween, and the Batman live action films on Blu-ray. So I'll dig through them to try and find that whichever one it was. Because I don't remember it, so I'll definitely re-educate myself in it. But again, thank you so much for giving us an education on comic books and why they're so important. Because it's something today, 2023, I still get made fun of for reading comics. Good Lord, at work where I work, I work in a corporate environment for a massive retail chain. And, I'm like, they have this, we have this in our hollowed halls right here. What are you making fun of me for? This is basically paying for our salaries. It means so much when I read your books that you were pushing for this so long ago in the 70s and to this very day. So I thank you so much for coming on the show and thank you for your kind words as well.
Thanks, Chris. This was a pleasure. Take care.
Bye. I will send you a link to this once it's